All right, good day, everybody. Welcome back to the lunch series. Today we have Dr. Neil Rhodes with University of Tennessee. He is our weed management specialist, and he's going to be talking today about managing weeds in pastures and hay fields. Dr. Neil, we appreciate you being on with us, and we're going to turn it over to you.
All right, let me see if I can get this show working. Okay, it looks like it's working. You should see a field of round bales.
Yes, sir, you're good.
Okay, I see a man that gives thumbs up, so evidently we're working. Folks, I'm glad to be here. I really enjoy doing meetings, and it's been kind of tough, not being able to be in the counties and to meet personally with folks, but been with a lot of Zoom meetings, as all of y'all have, and it's not as good as being there, but it's about the best we've been able to do. I want to go over some things, mainly just some reminders, some things about managing weeds in grasslands. My contact information is there on the screen. I give everybody my cell phone number. My desk phone at the office is just more of a nuisance than it is anything. So I've been giving my cell phone number out for years, and then there's my email address. So anyway, that's the best way to get a hold of me is on my cell. And of course, it's a smartphone. I got my email there too. So if I can help anybody, let me know. Things I want to go over today. I about 3 or 4 years ago, I really started bearing down on talking about what grass contributes to weed management, and I'm not going to let up on that till I retire, because that's our first and very most important component of weed management. I'll go through a little bit on that. Question I always get: what can I do about broom sedge? I'll talk about that program. Management of summer and annual perennial broadleaf weeds, things that are just right now on our windshield. A little bit later, as we move into the summer, we'll get into a good time for most of the woodies. I'll spend just a minute on an update on some of the new herbicides we got. Thank goodness we do have some new ones to talk about. Doesn't happen every day in range and pasture. But really, what I've been doing in my meetings, reminding growers, is a thick, healthy, actively growing stand of grass is really the most important weed control input, and it makes every herbicide look better. I don't care if it's 2,4-D or some of our second, third generation materials like Raison or Duracor. You just can't substitute for what? Crop competition. And one way to look at it, I'm not an economist. I don't know what's worse, a weed scientist trying to be an economist or an economist trying to be a weed scientist, but I'm certainly not an economist, don't want to be one. But the way I look at it, just from a dollars and cents standpoint, it increases your dollar return on herbicide and sprayer expenditures. And producers have more to feed along the way. So anyway, how do you get from this? That's unfortunately a fairly common sight. That's a close-up taken in basically a loafing lot or feeding area, where you see really all we got is pigweed and some goosegrass and just some other weeds. And you can spray that all day long, and without help from grass. Every time it rains, you're going to get another flush of weeds. I get a lot of questions on spiny pigweed in feeding areas. And when this was a few years ago, somebody asked that question. I said, well, just get up every Monday morning and spray 2,4-D. I know I'm being recorded. You can delete that out, man, but I don't recommend that. But it's just, I use that point to illustrate, without the help of grass, you can kill weeds, but they're just going to keep coming on. So getting from that to this, how do you get there? And I open with every meeting talking about this. First is soil testing. And yeah, I know that's a wheat field, but I thought it was a pretty picture that I found on the internet. And Ronnie, UT gets accused of not being able to do a meeting without talking about soil testing. That's about right, and there's some good reasons for that, and I don't apologize. So I'm encouraging producers, if they haven't tested some of these pastures and hay ground recently, might be good to invest some time into that. Of course, lime and fertilize according to those recommendations, and then manage weeds, and of course manage grazing. Now, I want to talk about broom sedge in the context of this, but broom sedge or broom sage, sage grass, whatever you want to call it, I always get a lot of calls on this one, and of course it is a warm season native grass. It's not a sedge. I had a former agent in West Tennessee argue with me about that, but no, it's a grass. It's very common in pastures throughout Tennessee and throughout the Mid-South. Yeah, very common in those that are low pH, low fertility, and really not intensively managed. That's where it's the worst. And of course, there's no selective herbicide for control of it in pastures. People have long said for decades, well, the way to get rid of broom sedge is to lime the ground. That'll get rid of it. Well, that's only part of the story. That picture right there was actually taken down in Cannon County, and you know, it's very representative of a lot of fields in Tennessee. Of course, you see the eastern red cedar in the background again. Those are two very common things in the landscape, and particularly in Middle Tennessee. But if you lime and do nothing else, what are you going to do? You're going to grow some very nice broom sedge. And broom sedge in that stage right there, and particularly well, a little bit younger, you know, is pretty good stuff to eat for cattle. But without just liming and then walking away from it, all that's going to do is enhance the growth of broom sedge. So in a situation where we have hopefully enough Kentucky 31 fescue to handle grazing, put these folks to work. What this has been found in research and also in producer experience for decades, that Kentucky 31, of course, is high in infected fescue. And one of the reasons that in Tennessee and you know most of the fescue area, the vast majority of tall fescue is Kentucky 31 high endophyte. Why? Because it withstands abuse, withstands close cutting, withstands heavy grazing much better than all other grasses, certainly better than orchard grass and better than broom sedge. So these folks right here are kind of the necessary icing on the cake to manage broom sedge. It takes a couple, 3 years, but you will see the broom sedge go backwards and fescue come on. Now, quite often producers, particularly when we're talking about low cattle prices, tell me, well, I don't have enough cattle to intensively graze, to put that level of grazing pressure on. And of course, you know, college boys like me are good at spending farmers' money for them. But what I generally will suggest where we don't have enough cattle is to take a look at maybe establishing some paddocks with some temporary fencing, and then move the cattle from field to field. That will allow you to put that level of pressure with fewer cattle. Also, of course, it'll allow each paddock to recover and produce better quality forage. So again, I wanted to go over that kind of tied into this this concept that you know, grass is our friend and it's essential for weed management. What's in our windshield? Right now, the easy summer annual broadleaves, should recognize those as common ragweed up at the top, pigweed, the bottom left, and cuckleburr, the bottom right. These are pretty easy to handle when they're in the seedling stage. That size cuckleburr there is about right. That common ragweed obviously is well past prime for spraying, but for 3 to 4 inches, 2,4-D amine, where we can use it. Now, we hadn't talked a lot about Freelex, and I'm talking more and more about it. Ransom Goodman, I saw you're on here. You and I talked about this yesterday. But in sensitive areas where we're worried, particularly where we're worried about drift, Ronnie on tobacco, and then of course we have gardens everywhere and vegetable production. Freelex is 2,4-D choline, and I'm not going to say it's non-volatile. Now, if some peddler tells you that their herbicide is non-volatile, they're stretching the truth. Table salt is about the only thing that's non-volatile, but this comes very, very close. Those of you that are familiar with Enlist and the 2,4-D tolerant crops from Dow developed that technology. That's the 2,4-D that's in there. I mean, you can't hardly even smell this stuff. So it's one, you can't be sloppy with it. But if you're really trying to get after drift management, particularly vapor drift, and you really need to use 2,4-D, this is one to think about. Of course, it's going to drift in the wind just like anything else. But anyway, early application on these, 1.5 to 2 pints generally is enough. If it's wet, weeds get away, I tell producers to clip them and then get a little regrowth and treat them. And of course, pigweed, it's going to come back every time it rains because every spiny amaranth that goes full season to seed can make 200,000 or more of those tiny black seed. It's not a great picture right there, but we were talking before we really started about prickly cider. This is its first cousin. This is arrowleaf cider. That's just another picture of it right there. You really don't see any grass. This one is very, very typical on horse farms. I don't know anything about horses, but I do know they're the ones I've seen are grazing all the time. And I get a number of calls on weed control in horse pastures, and it's usually the same story. Too many horses, not enough land, no grass. But if this thing is starting to get started, it's first cousin prickly cider, it's a summer annual. Everything is weak on it except for the aminopyrrolid products. Grazon Next and Duracore now, 2 inches or less will do a good job. If they're much more than 2 inches, they'll get away from it. Matt, I believe you were talking earlier that you had some prickly cider in a demonstration, and I believe you said that the Duracore really shined on that. Is that correct?
Sorry, it really made it curl up. Did a good job.
Okay. But anyway, this one grows where nothing else will grow. It's watering areas, feeding areas, ground hay rings, and all that. When it gets mature, some people think it's a perennial because it becomes very woody. And if you try to mow it, and I've mowed it myself, you can't hardly go slow enough for a bush hog to cut it. It just lays it over. And therefore, some farmers refer to it as ironweed. Now, that's not to be confused with tall ironweed that we'll talk about here in just a minute. Summer annual, summer broadleaf weeds and brush. Let's move into those. Right there's our big number one. And that's the one that when we first started a limited introduction of Grazon P+D, which was already in the border counties bordering Alabama for a number of years. We worked with Dow and the distributors on a limited introduction of P+D. That was our first real material that gave us any meaningful control of horse nettle. And then, of course, along came Grazon Next HL. And it has allowed us to do a good job on horse nettle. So we got the tools for it. It's still still one of our more prevalent perennial broadleaves. Producers by seed and rhizomes, dicamba and 2,4-D are weakest water on it. Basically, the aminopyrrolid products, again, about 1.5 pints of Grazon, 12 ounces of Duracore, or Chaparral. I don't make a lot of recommendations for Chaparral because we're mainly a fescue state, and most folks are kind of unhappy with the stunning and yellowing. But when we're applying it, when the fescue growth is slowing down as it is in summer, the injury is not quite as bad. It is needed if nodding spurge is present. Metsulfuron is really the only thing that will control nodding spurge, and I learned that from the turf guys. I'd use the Grazon Duracore, but if nodding spurge is building up, which My experience, nodding spurge comes in right after first hay cutting. This will pick it up very nicely. Had a student that did 3 years of research on horse nettle and also on tall ironweed, and without a doubt, the best time to spray horse nettle is when it's in the full bloom stage. You can kill it prior to that. You can kill it actually after it's made berries. But what we found through evaluating our plots the second and third year after application, which really, with perennial weed control, that's about the only gradings that matter, is the fall, at least the following year. Because you can take a lot of things and knock a weed down, but if perennials, you've won it if you can see the big difference the next year. So clearly, full bloom was the best. We had less regrowth from those rhizomes than the early application. And then the at berry stage application, of course, you're already contributing to the seed load. Now, I say usually in June. This is in Sweetwater Valley of Tennessee where we did most of that work. Jerry, I don't know what county you're in Alabama, but I'd suspect it's going to be a little bit earlier down there. And then, of course, I think Calvin, I saw you on there. You and the other border counties to Alabama. So anyway, we got some good answers on horse nettle, and it was a long time coming. Should recognize that as tall ironweed, another one of our common herbaceous perennials. This one, my experience year in and year out, where it gets started is usually in low areas. Now, it doesn't have to have a low area. I've seen it grow all over ridges. But it grieves me as a weed scientist to tell farmers to wait to spray, to tell them, no, this is too early. Because usually we're fighting the other end of that battle and saying, well, you should have sprayed earlier. But anyway, this is based upon research. We've done a little bit of it, but most of it was by Dow and some other and some other schools. Repeated mowing over the season on this weed, tall ironweed, weakens the root system, and then come in August. And again, this is based on timing work that we did. One of my former students, Will Phillips, did this work. About August, let it regrow to about a foot or so tall, spray it then, and again, you'll see the difference next year. Y'all in Middle Tennessee have more summer cedar or dog fennel than we do, and this mowing program works on it also. We did 2 years worth of work several years ago with David Qualls in Lincoln County, almost on the Alabama line, if I remember. That farm was, and this mowing weakened the root system, then spray it. This weed's kind of interesting. You go to Florida, and dog fennel is an absolute perennial. Tennessee, over the years, it's been kind of what they classify as a weak perennial. Then north of here, of course, where they have colder winters, it's actually an annual. But with our lack of cold winters, it's pretty much a full perennial in our state. A lot of things will kill it if you treat it right. Grazon, Duracor, of course, these are going to be awful good. Old Brash, which is another name for Weedmaster or Rainstar. The dicamba 2,4-D mix is pretty good on it too. Pasture Guard, I suggest for ironweed, as where people say, hey, I'm going to rotate this ground. I don't want to use aminopyrrolate. I don't want something residual. Pasture Guard's not bad. It's not bad on both of those weeds, but not going to be as good as an aminopyrrolate product. Taking care of woody perennials, and of course, basically, you're trying to prevent old field succession, which, this field right here, a number of you may have been on it's still new to me, but the Little River unit, the new dairy, that's here in Blount County where I grew up. That thing was a woody mess when they took it over. This was a field that, a pasture, I guess you could call it that. It wasn't in too bad a shape, but you see mostly it's got brambles in it. Now, what would happen if you just walked away from that? Well, it's going to transition into woodland. It's going to be locust, and then poplar, and then of course it's going to go on in that area into an oak hickory forest. But anyway, with woody weeds, we're fighting old field succession in most cases. Got a lot of good herbicides, particularly for brambles, and this is the number one that I get my calls on, is blackberries or brambles. In Tennessee, there's probably 8 or 9 different species of brambles, and that would include trailing dewberry. Tennessee, bush blackberry is the most common, and it's fortunately the easiest to kill. Now, this second point right here is based upon many years of research, most of it done by Dow AgriSciences, and there's a guy, he's retired now, but Bruce Pinkerton down at Clemson did a lot of this work. What I advise producers is if you're getting ready to get serious about brambles, these patches of brambles, do one of two things. Either mow them or spray them. Don't do both in the same year. Now, it's hard to sit there and watch that stuff grow. But where mowing basically does a couple of things. It burns diesel fuel, and it keeps your landlord off your back, as I've had a lot of farmers tell me. But it does not, it makes the field look a lot better for a little while, and I've mowed it myself. But it does not advance control because that root system is still there and still well established. Let's say if a farmer were to take over a rinse of ground that had been kind of let go, and it has some of these great big blackberry, good rabbit hunting patches of it, here and there on the field. I'd mow them the first year just to be able to get over them the next year, and then put a spray program together there. So again, based upon research, the third point, later is better than early. And this is based on a lot of research done by a lot of people. One of the locations I had just down the road from me down here in Friendsville, we looked at 3 years in a row, and August application, September application looked awfully good. If you look at the Dow label on Remedy and Pasture Guard, it'll tell you to spray after berry drop. Spot spray if possible, much less expensive and better coverage. They're very proud of Pasture. Pasture Guard's a good herbicide, but Corteva is very proud of it. But two options. My lead option generally is Pasture Guard HL, and these rates that you see there, those are not per acre, those are per 100 gallons. But right behind it's Remedy Ultra, same rate. And the surfactant, you use plenty of it, same rate of surfactant, 2 and 2. Now, if somebody calls me, I'll ask them if they've got Remedy Ultra on hand. I'll tell them, well, don't go out and buy Pasture Guard, go ahead and use up your Remedy. But when you go back to the store, get some Pasture Guard and try that, because I would give, particularly on brambles and certainly on woody legumes like the locust, I'd give Pasture Guard the nod. So anyway, spray to completely wet the foliage. These herbicides have no soil activity, so I tell producers if you spray it and then you're dosing it around the crown, you're wasting time and money. Also, I suggest consider using spray dye. That'll do 3 things. One, it'll keep you from missing bushes. It'll keep you from spraying the same one 3 times like I've been known to do. And then also, in terms of chemical exposure, you'll get a pretty good lesson from that purple stuff, Ronnie, when you're done spraying, because everywhere that purple is on you and your equipment, well, the herbicide's right there with it. So it's not bad to use it every now and then just as a reminder, of how much exposure we can get if we're not using good technique. Anybody recognize that? Hello? Okay. Privet hedge. This is it's one of our most invasive perennial shrubs. It's a native of China that was brought in on purpose in the early 1800s as an ornamental, escape from cultivation. and I get a lot of calls on it. It's a prolific seed producer. Birds just love those seed. You all have seen it. It produces a black fruit, and the seed are in that fruit, and the birds, as we move into the fall and winter, will just go into the woods and mob those seed. And then, of course, that's kind of like the old multiple rows. The seed goes right through the bird's digestive system. The crop of the bird will actually abrade that seed coat, and it comes out the other end, and it's ready to germinate. So that's how we get our infestation. Surprisingly, our go-to brush materials like Remedy and Pasture Guard are not that great on it. And this research, most of it was done by Dow. And after they did a lot of work with all of their auxin herbicides, came out the other end, and they said glyphosate is actually the best. And that's been my experience too. Now, a higher rate of glyphosate, say with a 4-pound generic glyphosate like Cornerstone, it'd be 3%, which normally on a lot of weeds we use 1%. Complete coverage 2 years in a row, and it's best in the fall. I used to recommend a foliar spray of Arsenal, and I've just about quit that. Arsenal is a great herbicide, but it does a lot of collateral damage. Like glyphosate, it'll kill grass, but it's harder to reestablish the grass. And then two, it's a non-starter where a lot of our privet occurs, which is a lot of the privet, it's shade tolerant. It grows as an understory under some of those valuable shade trees for cattle, like taller oaks and things like that. It'll flat because of the soil activity. It'll flat kill a big deciduous tree. This works well, and you have to have coverage. So the ones that are too big to cover, this is a good 2-person operation. One person on the chainsaw and the other with a pump-up sprayer or a paintbrush. Cut the stump, treat it immediately. Again, based upon research. If you treat it immediately, what happens is, of course, that stump is fresh, but you're actually able to take advantage of the turgor pressure in that still alive stump, and it'll actually just pull the glyphosate right in. So cutting all day and then waiting till the next day to spray is you're giving up a substantial amount of control. So it's hard to do everything just right, but again, this is what research in multiple states has shown. An all too familiar site in Tennessee, a wild cattle repair that comes from Bradford Pear, basically. Very common site, interstate right of way, state highway right of way, grows up in this stuff. Birds, it produces fruit. I don't have a picture of the fruit, but birds love the seed, and of course they get in there and eat the seed, fly over that ridge into your pasture, and deposit the seed over there. And this is one that can get away from you very, very quickly. Look at that thorn. That's a lot worse thorn than honey locust, in my opinion. And if you don't believe that thing will flatten the tire, just well, it will. It's a bad guy. And that thing, the bottom left, that is a solid patch of that stuff, and that's what a field can become very quickly. I worked with a guy up at Seymour, which is north end of this county, east end of this county rather, and he had a falling out with his mother over the farm, and she took the lease out from under him and gave it to another guy for a period of years. He let it grow up in this stuff, and so Lynn has been trying to get it reined in, but it'll get like that down there in the bottom left just in surprisingly in no time. Mowing it doesn't really accomplish much of anything. It allows you to get over the ground, but it resprouts very quickly. Digging them out without removing all the roots results in resprouting, so you can tell you're not going to get 100%. What are some options? Cut stump treatment with Remedy Ultra or glyphosate. I'd use glyphosate because it's going to be cheaper. foliar spray with Remedy Ultra or with Pasture Guard. I've done a little bit of this. My good buddy over at Starkville at Mississippi State, John Bird, has done a lot more than I have, and it responds very well to a foliar on both of these, and I can't really say that Pasture Guard is better than Remedy. I bolded that bottom point for a good reason. It takes a long time to reclaim heavily infested areas and to better attack them before they get established. And that's true about all brush. One thing that, when we're going into, again, typical situation, you pick up a farm that somebody's let go, or the man, woman, family that's been farming it has passed away. The heirs couldn't decide what to do with it, sits there and grows up. These fields heavily infested with brush, they don't get that way overnight, and you're not going to clean them up overnight. It's going to take 2 to 3 years. A little bit about some new herbicide technology that we've got. It's good to have some things to talk about that are new. Of course, everybody recognizes buckhorn planting, which we've had pretty good success with a fall followed by late winter 2,4-D application. And then, of course, one we haven't had really any good answers for, and that is Queen Anne's lace, or wild carrot is another name for it. Corteva just got Duracore labeled. It's been in the trade channel. There's been quite a bit of it already used. Actually, 2 active ingredients, aminopyrrolid and Rinscore. Rinscore actually is, I can't remember the name of it in rice, but it's actually a rice herbicide. And again, because the aminopyrrolid does not fit rotation ground, it's for use only in permanent grass pastures and hayfields. They've got a winner in this. It's very impressive post broadleaf herbicide. Pretty much picks up the whole portfolio of weeds that Grazon gets, plus wild carrot and buckhorn planting. So those are 2 weaknesses for Grazon that this one picks up. Low use rate, 12 ounces per acre. And I was surprised they came out of the block with this thing. I thought it'd be more expensive. Now, of course, it's far from free, but it's going to be right around, for that 12 ounces, right around $10 or a little less per acre. So that was good news. It's going to kill clover, but it'll be, the same rules apply as with the other aminopyrrolid herbicides. You can replant clover about a year later. It's not a restricted use material. There's no grazing restrictions for any livestock, including horses. Low volatility and low odor. As far as stewardship goes, we've spent a lot of time talking about stewardship, but I'm not going to let up on that. It's going to follow under the same recommendations as any of the other aminopyrrolid herbicides in terms of it's not for rotation, feeding of treated hay, use of manure, composting, etc. As the other aminopyrrolid products. So that's all the same, but good-looking new herbicide. And what I've always seen, we learn a lot about these chemicals in research, but where we really learn a lot is after it's been in the market and in the hands of producers for a couple of years. We learn boatloads of information right after that launch. So we pay really close attention to what farmers are doing with it. Kind of exciting thing, a lot of people are excited about it from Corteva. It's not on the market yet. Proclova. This is a herbicide that spares established white clover. And if you look at surveys of cattle producers over the years, and one of the best surveys was one that was done, probably about 10 years ago, by my friend J.D. Green, my counterpart up at Lexington, Kentucky. The big number one by far why producers are hesitant to spray pastures is not the cost of herbicide. It's, I don't want to lose my clover. Understand that. I haven't priced legume seeds recently. A couple of years ago, I got some prices on them, but our renovation rate, which is to add white clover, ladino clover and red clover, was about $23 an acre just for the seed alone. So no small thing. Now, we found on established white clover, if you keep the rate of 2,4-D down, you can spare most of it, but it's not going to have as broad a spectrum as Pro Clover. And of course, Pro Clover is not going to have the broad spectrum that DuraCore does. But a lot of interest in this. It's not on the market yet, but I would predict that once it is on the market, there'll be a lot of cattle farmers try this one. So kind of a different concept, very exciting. Outrider's not a new herbicide. It's been around a long time, but one of our recommendations is relatively new. But Outrider was actually first developed by Monsanto. They got it registered, it got to the market, and then about that time they started spending 100% of their time on Roundup Ready. So they just kind of put it over on the side shelf. Now, there's been a lot of it used in rights of way. Monsanto was so covered up with Roundup Ready traits work. Valent put some time into it, and they have supported a recommendation for fescue, well-established fescue, for 3/4 of an ounce in a summer application for Johnson grass control. Now, my experience where Johnson grass is the worst in fescue, it's not in pastures because cattle will graze it pretty nicely, but it's in the hay fields. And this has looked good. Now, they didn't support recommendation in orchard grass, but we've done some work, 2 to 3 years now of work in orchard grass, and the crop tolerance looks good there. So and I've had some producers try it on orchard grass, established orchard grass. So that would be one for orchard grass hay fields that would be really cool if we could get them to support that recommendation. As always, I want to close out with some comments about herbicide stewardship. We've spent a heck of a lot of time in Tennessee over the last decade trying to come up with some educational materials and talking about keeping herbicides in place, particularly pasture herbicides. And what he told me what happened here was this gentleman did this to himself. He had what was used to be a pasture out behind his house. Always kept it mowed around it, and he one day in the middle of the summer he was going to try to kill some of the broadleaf weeds. So he got out there on about a 90-degree day, loaded up his sprayer with 2,4-D ester, and waited till the wind was not blowing on the grapes and proceeded to spray all around them. Of course, that's 100% volatility, and that won't kill those grapes, but of course there'll be no crop from them that year. Now, they came back the next year, but a little bit of a phenoxy or an auxin herbicide in the wrong spot, as we unfortunately know, particularly from dicamba since 2016 in West Tennessee and Mid-South. A little bit can do a lot of damage. This is our logo, herbicide stewardship, protecting crops, environment, and technology. The first two are obvious. What do I mean by protecting the technology? What we mean by that is, if EPA puts their stamp on a herbicide, they don't want to see any screw ups. They want it to work because it makes them look bad if there's blow ups. And of course, they've taken it on the chin politically with the dicamba. But protecting the technology, that means keeping tools available to farmers with minimal restrictions. EPA rarely will ban a crop protection chemical. Instead, what they'll do, they will layer on more and more restrictions for a company says, hey, I can't sell enough of this stuff to pay to keep it on the market. sometimes they'll disappear that way. We got a website. If you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to take a look at it sometime, herbicidestewardship.com. There's a lot of useful, at least we feel, useful educational materials on there, fact sheets on preventing off-target movement, and then also fact sheets on diagnosing suspected cases of off-target movement. We got some time-lapse videos that are that are pretty cool. Trevor Israel got his PhD with me a few years ago, and he worked full-time for me too. But he did all the heavy lifting on this project and used set up the time-lapse camera and Photoshop those together. So those are kind of neat. If you haven't seen them, take a look at them. We got an email address for the program. I should check it more, but it's called drift@utk.edu. Matt, that brings me back to my beginning slide, and that's really all I was going to say.